a presentation on the collaborative wins for voting accessibility in Louisiana. The presenters will be Ms. Ashley Shelton. She's the president and CEO of the Power Coalition. Dr. Ashley Voilon, the policy analyst at Disabilities Rights Louisiana, and Ms. Victoria Wenger, the attorney at the Legal Defense Fund, LDF. You can read the description for this session and their bios located on pages 8 and 9 in the conference booklet, which is linked in the chat. So whenever you guys are ready, we will be excited to hear from you all.
Ashley Voilon, do you want to start with introducing yourself?
Yes, so hi, I am Ashley Voilon. I am a Filipino white woman with my hair pulled up in a ponytail behind a blurred out background, and I'm wearing a blue and orange striped dress. I have dark colored eyes and I am sitting in a wheelchair.
Ashley Shelton.
Good morning. My name is Ashley Shelton, and I am an African-American female with long dark hair, and I have a homesteading background behind me, and I am wearing a black shirt and black pants.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Victoria Wenger. You all can call me Tori. I am a white woman wearing a pink blazer. My light, kind of dark blonde hair is slicked back in a low bun, and I have green eyes. I'm very, very excited to talk to two of my favorite collaborators in the work to make voting rights more accessible in the state of Louisiana and truly everywhere this morning. We have so much to celebrate in real exciting wins for voting rights and accessibility in Louisiana in the past few years. And that's truly a credit to collaboration and seeing the accessibility rights communities, the racial justice communities, civil rights and voting rights advocates and experts coming together to collectively find solutions to move the state forward in productive ways. But before we get into talking about some of those wins and future opportunities for collaboration and progress, I think it'd be helpful to identify some of the issues that we've been trying to tackle when it comes to voting accessibility for Louisianians with disabilities and truly any voter in the state who's trying to access their right to vote. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Ashley Voilon. Can you speak from your experience as a voter in Louisiana and also as an advocate in accessibility and voting rights about some of the issues with voter accessibility that either you've experienced or heard about from voters in the state?
So thanks, Tori, for that question. And before I go on, I just want to apologize if you all can hear all the road work going on in the background. They're fixing my neighborhood, and it's right outside my door. But some of the issues that I've experienced as a voter is some voting locations are still non-compliant. There's one close to our office on Oak Street that has a ramp to get up to it, but the ramp is broken and rotted out. And I'm still working on getting it fixed for the next election. So we have just complete non-compliance to some of these polling place locations. And some of this is due to even inaccessible schools in the city of New Orleans. And also we see a lot of parking issues. So a lot of the parking in New Orleans is not available for people with disabilities, but along with day of voting and physical accessibility. There are also issues with absentee ballots. So we saw a lot, especially during COVID, where people's absentee ballots were not being received by the voters or registrar's office. I get a lot of phone calls of people that just need me to register them to vote because they don't know how, or they can't do it themselves for one reason or another. And then one issue that coming off the top of my head is that when I personally applied to be a part of the permanent absentee ballot for people with disabilities and seniors, there is a place that you need a witness to sign certifying your absentee ballot. And that may seem like a small task for people, but some people with disabilities and seniors don't have people around them every day to get this done. And for me, it wasn't done in a way that was clear that you needed it done. So I didn't even notice that I needed a witness. And so in order to get my ballot to be valid, I needed to get one of my personal care attendants to go down to City Hall to sign for me, which was another barrier to go over for people with limited mobility. Also, even though there is the email ballots with the link, you still need to print it out and get the signature on it as well, which is another barrier to voting for people with disabilities and for a lot of other people as well that may not have access to printers or things like that. So that is just a few of the things that I've seen that are most prevalent interstate.
Thank you. So Ashley Shelton, you and I across the Legal Defense Fund and Power Coalition for Equity and Justice have been hearing stories like this for years now and doing election protection and other advocacy in the state. And Power Coalition for Equity and Justice was pivotal in 2022 to advancing HCR 14, which was a joint resolution in the legislature calling for the creation of a task force to look into these issues and to develop recommendations for solutions to the legislature. Can you talk a bit about the effort behind HCR 14 and the intentionality that you and colleagues had in crafting that resolution to ensure that voices like Ashley Voilon's and other voters across the state were empowered to come up with these solutions?
Absolutely. Good morning again. And, one of the things that I'm really proud of is that, HCR 14, really created a pathway to, ultimately this legislative win this year, at our legislature around, voting rights for not only folks with disabilities, but everyone in our state. And so HCR 14, what it did was, create the pathway for us to have a task force that was made up of members with disabilities, so that as we crafted recommendations, as we talked through and tried to understand, the issues facing voters with disabilities, this task force really, it was really important to us that it wasn't just a task force of folks that weren't directly impacted. It was also really important to us that we were actually getting to the heart of the issues, and that's for any disability, whether it was, having operators hang up the phone because they wouldn't wait for, the telephone relay, or, of course, having, members of our community not being able to access a polling location because there's an ineffective, there's not a ramp, or the ramp is broken, and, making sure that we were hearing and understanding all of the voices and all of the ways in which our current, procedure for, for voting, creates additional barriers for, the disability community. And so with HCR 14, that task force was diverse. And it was, absolutely made up with, folks from across the state of Louisiana. So even from a perspective of geography, but also from the perspective of any, of the diversity of the disability community, to have their voices at the table was critical and so important. And also, I think it is the reason that we were successful this year, and actually winning, several of the recommendations that the task force ultimately made to the legislature, and Representative Matt Willard actually carried that legislation successfully this year. I think one thing that I would also, say that is really important, important for us was that, we see a lot of times when the legislature creates these task forces and or creates a body to review an issue, they oftentimes, stack the deck with folks that aren't going to push the line or, really get to the heart of what those issues are. And with HCR 14, we were able to actually, hold the line on who should make up this task force, and to have that task force come together and do the work of identifying, issues with voting and access. And so we are really proud of that win. We're really proud of the recommendations that ended up coming out of that task force. I think, one of the things, there are a couple of things that were surprising about the task force, but I think also, made it so important that we had a diverse, set of voices around the table, was one, this belief that because someone has a disability, that means that we, that somehow anyone's voice is less than or shouldn't be accommodated. I think we challenged that and really pushed back against that throughout this task force process, as well as this, this current legislative session that just ended. And I think it was really important to, to fight and to be really clear about the fact that all voters in the state of Louisiana have agency, and in particular our disability community. And that one of the things I really appreciate is that, at the end of the day, we pushed hard on the Secretary of State's office to do the right thing and to come up with solutions steeped in people's real lived experiences. And it was one of the things that actually shined through. We also, at that same time that we created this task force, had an early voting task force, and we're not able to actually get a diverse set of folks to be a part of that task force. And so we know the power of having leaders, throughout the, the community to actually have their voices heard in the process. And so that was a lot of the success of the task force last year that then led to the legislative wins and recommendations and wins of this year.
Excellent. I think you highlight really important points, Ashley, in that, this task force brought into conversation the election administrators who are empowered to enforce our voting rights laws, to administer our elections, brought, the Secretary of State's office, representatives from the clerks of court, the registrar of voters, from all of these positions of power in election administration in Louisiana, in direct conversation with directly impacted voters and experts in disability and in the diverse range of accessibility needs that come to factor in our voting processes. And Ashley Voilon, you were both Ashleys on this call, were members of that task force. And Ashley Shelton, you highlighted, some of your takeaways. But Ashley Voilon, I'm curious about what some of the highlights and the lowlights were for you in participating in those meetings for the task force and in the process of coming together with a report to the legislature as the ultimate product of that effort. And you're on mute, Ashley Voilon.
Thank you. So as I was saying, Ashley brought up so many good points that needed to be highlighted. And I remember at the very beginning of this task force, when it was being put together, one of our initial meetings, Tori and Ashley, I remember us saying how excited we were because this was actually going to be a task force that did something, that made some change. And I think oftentimes in Louisiana, we go to things with the thinking of it just is what it is, or Louisiana is just the way they are. And so we don't expect a lot of change to come about because we're set in our ways, right? And so this task force just showed us that if you stand at a united front, that anything is possible. So that was my biggest takeaway of the task force, and just the diversity of people with disabilities that we had on the task force. It brought up some accessibility issues that even I didn't take note of. One of our task members brought up the fact that there is no sip and puff technology available. And so that's one barrier to people with disabilities and being able to cast their vote that I didn't even think of because it wasn't in my personal lived experience. So it brought up those issues too. And then one of the low points, and I won't even say the low point because it brought up a lot of camaraderie between the community, is just the audacity of some of these comments that we received at the meetings about issues not being in the realm of those of us with disabilities, or that we wouldn't even care about them or be interested in them. Because I think oftentimes people look at people with disabilities as just having limitations, but they don't look at us as a diverse group. And the thing about people with disabilities is that we belong to every group out there. So we have to look at things through an intersectional lens. And without that, we don't really get the full picture. Like I said, some of the issues that affect other people don't affect myself, so I don't think about them. And so I think that was important. And just that this task force, if we wanted to get something done, we stood as a united front. And that's how we got several other things implemented that we got implemented, was standing in as a united front. When other people voted no against us, we had enough yeses to get things put on the addendum. And so that showed a lot of strength in our community. And I think, although this was a voting accessibility task force, this was such a great task force for people with disabilities because it showed us like concrete change of what we could do in Louisiana. So I think this was powerful, yes, for disability accessibility in voting, but this was even more powerful to show people with disabilities what could be done. And the sky is the limit.
You raised so many incredibly important points, Ashley, that really inspire for me so much reminiscing on conversations throughout the task force process and opportunities for collaboration. While the Legal Defense Fund was not one of the members on the task force, like both of you and your organizations, we had the opportunity to submit testimony or to speak to the task force because of exactly what you were saying about intersectionality. LDF is a racial justice organization. It's the oldest civil rights law firm in the country and a much more expansive organization now. And for us, we always saw this, as an intersectional issue because 1/3 of the state of Louisiana adult population has a disability. 1/3 of the state of Louisiana are Black people who we represent in all different realms of legal cases or other advocacy. And the instance of disability in the state is much higher within the Black community. But the solutions to voting accessibility truly impact everyone. There's this idea of the curb cut effect, where curb cuts were often seen of and originated as an accessibility solution to ensure people don't have to step up onto a curb, but everyone utilizes them in beneficial ways all the time. And we see that with voting accommodations today, in making sure that parking lots are accessible and are not full of potholes or going to get swept away in the rain in the rainiest seasons, in making sure that vote by mail is secure and accessible to people in times of need, whether that's for health or other reasons. This task force really provided a venue for those important conversations about how important accessibility is, how the ADA and other accessibility laws need to be enforced and people need to know their rights. But we don't have to limit it at that. There's opportunities to go beyond what the law requires and to innovate. So much innovation came out of the HCR 14 conversations and the strength of that very diverse community of Louisiana voters and experts. So I want to recap a little bit of what that task force produced, and then we can talk about everything that flowed out of it. So HCR 14, the task force produced a report earlier this year that included over a dozen recommendations to the legislature. And that included recommendations to change areas of the law. It also included recommendations to just better enforce or to make administrative decisions to improve how elections are made more accessible, but are really already permitted within the realm of the law. So that was a robust document that then folded into multiple bills that were filed this past legislative session, in large part thanks to both of you and all the other organizations and allies that worked on the task force or supported the task force's work. So I'll start with HB 553, which was sponsored by Representative Glover. That bill, unfortunately, was not successful. It was one of the policy recommendations that had been supported unanimously by members of the task force who represented voters with disabilities, had disabilities themselves, or were allies like you, Ashley Shelton, but was not endorsed by the election administrators on the task force. Specifically, what the bill did was call for the appointment of a voter with a disability to the State Board of Election Supervisors, which is one of the governing entities that oversees election administration in the state of Louisiana. Unfortunately, that bill did not succeed, but it was an organizing and collaboration opportunity for us all to spark really important conversations, and we will certainly be returning to the efforts. Conversely, HB 449 is one to celebrate because it was what we call an omnibus, or a multi-fold bill that achieved multiple things successfully based off of recommendations from the HCR 14 task force. The bill, which was sponsored by Representative Willard, who had originally called for the formation of the task force, that bill was able to now require increased training on the Americans with Disabilities Act and other state and federal voting accessibility protections for poll commissioners. So the people working at the polls on election days, they'll have more training on accessibility requirements and accommodations, best practices. They'll also be tested on it more now too, in the exams that they have to complete before becoming able to serve as a poll worker. The bill also calls for the appointment of an ADA compliance officer in the Department of State. So working for the Secretary of State's office. That person will be charged with conducting biannual audits on how accessible the voting process is You all know there are elections every single year, multiple seasons of the year, and this will really require proactive checks to make sure that those elections are accessible. That officer will also convene an advisory group. So another part of the bill is creating a voting accessibility advisory group, which is really inspired by the success of HCR 14, the innovation and the leadership from the people with disabilities on that task force. That'll fold now into a more permanent advisory group working with and for the Secretary of State's office to make sure that there's that information exchange and collaboration to ensure election administrators know what the issues are and have a real support system to come up with solutions from folks that are most versed in those solutions because they're living these experiences every day. So that is a huge win. It was signed into law earlier this year by Governor Edwards, and we are just exciting to see everything that'll come from it. But I really want to hear from you, Ashley Shelton, because Power Coalition was so pivotal to making that bill happen. Can you speak to the importance and inspiration behind that legislation?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think one of the things that, we're really proud of is that what we understand is that when anyone is disenfranchised, we're all disenfranchised. And what this legislation has done is, again, if we address issues for those that have accessibility issues or any kind of disability that impacts their ability to walk in their agency as a voter, right? Like that we have basically made it better for everyone. I mean, I vote in a very dark gym. And even though I have perfect vision, the idea that we would be able to increase lighting, the ability to actually have an office where we can call, as a community, as a state, as citizens and voters, right, that we can call to have our questions answered in real time, to be able to have, real support around, we've had sip and puff technology that is actually federal law, that it is within each polling location, throughout the state. But, as Dr. Voilon mentioned, we don't have actual poll workers that were trained on how to use that were trained on how to actually support voters that actually needed and wanted to use that technology. And so this legislation creates a clear pathway for any voter with any type of disability to be able to have their voices heard on a regular basis, right? Like there's actually a staff person that, is, ADA compliant and can help and understand in the ways in which we need to continue to improve this process and the experience of voters in the state of Louisiana. And then I think the other thing that we're really, proud of was that I think that, through the task force process to actual legislation, we really had to fight to, to create the space for real solutions. I think that as a member of that task force, we were, really concerned that they were just going to push through, create an experience that didn't reflect the fullness of so many of the voices and membership of our task force. And I was really proud to work with the task force members to really open that space up and really fight for the things that we all spent our time coming together to address through the task force. And so this legislation, just opens up a real opportunity for there to be real solutions in real time, to actually have a staff person that folks can actually reach out to and work with directly, as well as having our ongoing voice a part of, a process within the Secretary of State's office. And so it's a huge win. And, and one of the things that I often share is that, again, like a win for any voter in our state is a win for all voters. And this work and this opportunity that has been created through this legislation is, just a huge win for voters in the state of Louisiana, and also, around the realities of, all voters are important. All voters have their own agency and voice as a voter. And I think that that was also one of the more powerful things that came out of this task force, is that, you know, challenging their preconceived notions of what does it even mean to be a person with disabilities, you know, challenging their ignorance of, you know, of many of the ways in which folks with disabilities access their right to vote, their, you know, to have their voices heard. You know, like this was a really powerful experience in, you know, holding government accountable and also ensuring that we actually were getting to, you know, proper election administration, but more importantly, that we were within, you know, that we were actually following the law, right? Like that we were actually in compliance with federal law. And making sure that we're making these, you know, making these changes so that all of the members of our community can vote. And so really proud of this win. You know, we do election protection every year. And, you know, in that election protection work, it is to take the stories of voters throughout the state of Louisiana to understand, right, like what their experiences are, what's happening in real time, what are those barriers. And, you know, this task force and this legislative win are a beautiful example of understanding a problem and then, you know, taking action and actually getting the result. And it was such a powerful result that it couldn't be undone, right? Like it went through the legislative process. You know, members of the task force held their ground and really fought for, you know, these wins. And so really proud to be a part of this, you know, of this task force and this team of leaders throughout our community who really fought and stood up for what was right.
I think that you raise many good points, but one point kind of speaks to one of the questions that we had from the audience about whether or not sometimes voting rights violations are just a blatant disregard of the ADA and a lack of enforcement. And I think that's one of the things that really came out of the task force, is that there needs to be that dialogue and communication between, you know, those of us who are either actively trying to make observations of ADA compliance issues so we can advocate for voters and do this type of work, but also voters with disabilities understanding what their rights are and making sure that there is a line of communication, whether it's a compliance officer or other means, to make sure that those stories are heard, are understood, and then are addressed through active enforcement of the accessibility laws that already exist. We don't have to rewrite. So I really think that you really address what one of the questions is here, because it's so true that the ADA is robust. Accessibility and voting rights laws are robust on paper, but they have no power if they're not enforced by those who have the power to enforce them, but also if they're not understood by people who can exercise their right to vote and should have every single power of the law behind them as it currently exists. So Ashley Voilon, I'm curious kind of what you would say is the message that voters with disabilities in Louisiana can take from this advocacy win, or the other lessons learned from the process that led to HB 449?
So before I go into the process or anything like that, I just want to mention that if you have a disability and there's something that limits you or becomes a barrier to you in the voting process and you don't know whether that can be accommodated, always call us at the Advocacy Center and you can ask to speak to me and we can talk about that situation to see if that's something that can be helped or solutions that I may have that you may not have thought about. Our number, and I'll leave it in the chat, is 504-522-2337. So I just want to put that out there. But the one lesson that I want people in the disability community, as well as people all over, is that as long as you fight for what you believe in and stand your ground, anything can be possible. And as Ashley was speaking, it brought back great memories in my head. I do a lot of advocacy work for myself and others whether it's here or nationwide. And this has been one of my greatest experiences, if not number one, because as a task force, not only did we meet at the Capitol, but we also met on our own time as well. So we knew what we were going in for. We had a plan. Ashley and Tori were very instrumental in taking what we wanted and putting it into beautiful documents that were well articulated and organized. So we are so thankful to all of your work for that. But it just goes to show that what a task force can actually do if you put in the work behind it. Because the one thing that we went into the task force all saying is that we just didn't want a task force for to be just a task force for the written word. We wanted a task force that actually made change and actually did something, and that's actually what we did. And this is just our first step, because I believe that we're all gonna stay in touch and all rally together, and we're just gonna grow bigger and better. So my takeaway message to people of our community and anyone who's disenfranchised or anything of that nature, because I fully agree with what Ashley said in that if someone's disenfranchised, then we're all disenfranchised, because what's good for one is good for all. Like with Tori's curve cut scenario. And so I just want people to know that if you're unsure about something, ask, because the most that can be said to you is no, but you never know until you ask. And there's so many things out there. And right now is just the start of us fighting to get the effectiveness of all these laws being put into place. Because like Tori said, there can be all the laws in the world, but if no one's enforcing them, then it's just written words that don't mean anything.
Absolutely. And I think one of the recommendations from the task force, which will hopefully kind of come under this umbrella of the work within the Secretary of State's office and the compliance officer and the advisory group, is the idea of education, about making sure that there are materials, that there are trainings, that, you know, the rights that exist are made known to people so that our election workers can enforce them and celebrate them, embrace them, but voters can also feel fully empowered with their rights and with knowing that they have people that they can ask questions, including every person on this panel, all accessible to answer questions about voting rights and accessibility at the polls, whether that's through the number that you provided, Ashley Voilon, or the election protection work that Ashley Shelton and I and people across the nation collaborate on through 866-R-VOTE and the election protection hotline. But really speaking to that idea that knowledge is power, Ashley Voilon, you do so many great trainings on voting rights and accessibility at the polls. And while we have this audience, I'm curious if you can share a few of the key voting rights or other attributes at a polling site that people should be aware of, so they know that they can ask for these things or can otherwise, you know, be on the lookout at their polling site to make sure that those accommodations are there.
Thank you for asking this, because before doing this work, I didn't know that half of these things existed. I didn't know anything existed, to be honest. And I am a wheelchair user with cerebral palsy. So a few key things that people don't know is that if you have a visible disability, you can go up to the front of the line. when going to vote in person. The voting machine can be moved up or down depending on your height requirements. You can bring in your own magnifying glass, or they have ones that can be provided so you can see the voting machine. There are audio boxes that can be provided as well, that can read the ballot out to you if you need it read, or for any reason at all. There is also Braille that is available. You can bring your own headphones, or they have them provided as well. And also, one key thing that I like to tell people, that people often don't know, if you go to the Go Vote website, you can get a sample ballot of everything that's on the ballot, so you can take as much time as you need to make your decisions. And then either you can bring your phone in the voting booth or bring a printout, so that way you can have yourself a little cheat sheet. This is something I like to do personally, because I take forever making decisions sometimes, and I have to go back and research things that I thought I knew before. So that is a thing for people. Like I mentioned, there are the email link to the ballots that can be emailed to you, or the permanent absentee ballot program for people with disabilities or seniors. And what this program does is it mails you out a ballot before the election. That way you can mail it back. Like I mentioned earlier, you do need a witness to sign with you, but you can mail it back, and they will keep mailing you these absentee ballots unless your ballot is returned undeliverable. One thing that people get confused is that just because you sign up for the absentee ballot program, it doesn't mean that you can't vote in person. You still have that right to vote in person, but this is another option that is given to you just in case you may not have a ride to the poll, or you may be sick that day. It's just another option, so you can pick whatever option you need. And also you have 20 minutes in the voting booth as well to cast your vote, so that you don't have to worry about time limit. And honestly, I've never been asked to leave out of the voting booth based on time. And you can bring a trusted person with you inside the voting booth to help you vote. And if you don't have a person with you, the poll worker has to assist you in the voting process. And that's just a few off the top of my head. I'm sure I missed a couple of them. So Ashley and Tori, please step in if you're like, she missed this or she missed that. But like I said before, if you have any questions about, I have trouble in voting because of this or that, and it wasn't mentioned, be sure to contact me. I'll leave my email address and number, but be sure to contact me, and I'll let you know what's possible.
Thank you, Ashley. That's excellent. And there are certainly other ways to reach out to you, or resources that both Disability Rights Louisiana and Power Coalition LDF will provide around election seasons to make sure that people are able to remember all of those rights that are, enforceable both in Louisiana and many are rooted in federal laws that are decades old now, like the ADA, and aren't going anywhere. So we do have a comment in the chat about the need to stay ever vigilant and to continue this work and not just take HB 449 and not keep up the momentum. So Ashley Shelton, how can folks get involved with Power Coalition for Equity and Justice and our broader work to advance voting rights and protect voters' rights in Louisiana?
Absolutely. So, I mean, we are ever vigilant. I mean, I think that, Power Coalition is a voting rights organization and proud partners of the Legal Defense Fund. And we are fighting on every front, and so we are vigilant and we welcome you to join us in this fight. I mean, we can't hold, we can't hold every single issue, but we love partnering with, partners like Dr. Voilon and other disability rights organizations to make sure that we are, that we're doing the work, right? And that we're understanding what those issues are. And so Power Coalition runs a robust election protection program in partnership with LDF. And, and with that election protection, I would give you a couple of ways to reach out. So we usually during elections have a voter hotline, and it's 866-OUR-VOTE, and it's available year round to help with issues. And then they also liaise and work with Disability Rights Louisiana to make sure that we are following up, that we are finding solutions in real time. And so definitely, I always tell folks, if you go to vote and you're having issues, do not leave your polling location, get your phone out and dial 866-OUR-VOTE so that you, can have those issues addressed in real time. And then again, I think that I agree with so many of the questions, like we do have to be ever vigilant. We're going to have to continue to engage with the Secretary of State's office to make sure that this ADA compliance officer, is effective. We've also got to do the work of making sure that as they put together this ongoing voter, disability task force, that the voices of people with real experiences are at the table continuing to define those solutions. And so, and we also, appreciate too and work with national partners like LDF, but other national partners that are going to, hold the line around the fact that, again, we've said it several times during the task force process that it is their job to effectively, administer elections in the state of Louisiana for all of its citizens. And we're going to continue to hold them accountable to that and continue to push the line. And so feel free to reach out to me at Power Coalition. Our website's www.powercoalition.org. And my email address is ashelton@powercoalition.org. And certainly if you have broader questions, info@powercoalition.org. But we are excited and always here to work with our partners. And to Ashley, Dr. Voilon's point, it's not just enough to win policy, but to actually have policy enforced. And so really proud to have worked with all of you to make this moment real and possible, and definitely to hold the line and hold them accountable as we implement these wins.
Excellent. I think we're right about at time, but Ashley Voilon, can you quickly share how folks can lean on Disability Rights Louisiana and get in touch with you?
Yes. So thank you for that question. My email address is Voilon, so AVOLION @disabilityrights.org. And our phone number is 504-562-2337. And also, I want to mention before we leave that I am currently doing video interviews with the gubernatorial candidates as well as the Secretary of State candidates. So keep an eye out at our website or on our social media. Our website is www.disabilityrightslaa.org.
Thank you to both of my favorite Ashleys. To close things out, you can reach myself, my colleagues, and learn more about the Legal Defense Fund at naacpldf.org. And as Bambi has put in the chat, you can find more links to our organizations and information about each of us in the conference booklet. thank you all. Thank you to Goda. Thank you to both my Ashleys. It's a pleasure to have this conversation, and I'm so excited to continue this collaborative work together.
Yes, and I forgot the most important thing, statewide elections this fall in October. And, you know, one of the most important ways that we can make sure that this issue stays front and center and top of mind is that as we think about who's running for Secretary of State and governor, you know, all statewide elected office, as well as your local House and Senate rep, you know, House rep and senator, make sure that we're bringing these issues directly to them and holding them accountable as, you know, as they seek re-election and seek office. And so, you know, really want to make sure your voice is heard this fall.
Thank you all.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Shelton, Attorney Wenger, I'm sorry, and Dr. Voilon, North Louisiana girl here. I'm always mispronouncing names and everything, but I am personally a huge fan of this task force. Y'all inspire me so much. So thank you so much for all the work that you guys are doing and for the impact that you have had, not only for the disabled community, but for everyone, every single person that's in Louisiana. With that being said, our next session will begin at 10:15, and you all are welcome to remain logged in. So thank you so much, and y'all have a great day.